Hello and welcome to Between the T's, the knowledge sharing program with Texas Bank and Trust. I'm your host, Aaron May. So, we have come to the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. Here being the month of July, we're celebrating specifically Independence Day and all that means to us as Americans. But you know, there's so much history that goes into this moment that I think a lot of times we as Americans forget, because we get so caught up in the pageantry and the celebration that we forget the cost and the sacrifice that went into forming this country and went into building the nation that we take for granted. And makes me wonder, do we really understand the cost of freedom? And not only do we understand the cost of political freedom, but how does that tie into our finances, and how does that tie into our world today? Have we really given much thought to what it takes to become financially free? Have we given much thought to what it takes to maintain freedom? Just like it took a lot to maintain and to establish this nation, there's a lot that goes into establishing and maintaining our finances as well. So to talk about this, I am honored to have on my show Chris Bearden. He's an Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer for Texas Bank and Trust. He has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to accounting and finances. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about the high cost of freedom. Chris, how are you doing this morning?
Very well, Aaron. Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate that introduction. Pleasure to be here and an honor to be invited to share the microphone with you on your podcast. I'm very excited to be here. I've never done a podcast before, so this is going to be a really cool experience. I'm excited. I'm
looking forward to it. This is going to be a good conversation because I know you also, in addition to being a finance guru, you're also a history buff and a military buff. Every time I walk into your office, one of the favorite things I love doing is seeing your display of model airplanes and stuff like that. And so I just appreciate that history and all that goes into that.
I love learning about history. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I definitely would qualify as a history enthusiast. And I love watching the documentaries, and I love learning about the past. And you're right. I think that's going to be especially appropriate to the topic that we've chosen for today.
So thinking about America, thinking about the fact that we are now cresting the top of 250 years as a country, what does freedom look like to you? What does that capture in your mind when you think of the freedom that we have here in America?
Well, it encompasses so many things, and America has shown out throughout human history as just being that beacon of of human freedoms.
Yeah.
Some of our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence especially, just lays out so clearly. These are our core beliefs, and that idea that a government should be built around the ability of mankind to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as it was so eloquently written by Thomas Jefferson, and just lays out there the basic human rights that we believe in. Some very new ideas coming out of a period in human history that had been steeped in monarchy and the idea that some people are born to rule and other people will just by virtue of their station in life and virtue of their condition of birth will never be able to rise to that level. But America really was a result of that change in mindset that we should be a meritocracy and a democracy, and to actually establish a democracy through a Republican form of government, not Republican in the sense of the political party, but
Right.
just in the sense of that type of government to make that democracy work and to facilitate it.
Yeah.
And the fact that we've lasted 250 years, I think, is a tribute to that success. Nonetheless, we have our issues, as we're going to point out
Right.
later in the conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of those type of problems and issues that we're going to talk about here in a minute, like, do you think that sometimes we take for granted the fact that 250 years have passed since our nation was founded, that we forget what actually went into forming this nation?
Absolutely. And, we have an unfortunate tendency, not just we as Americans, it's human nature.
Yeah.
To not learn our history as we should, and not learn the lessons from history that we should. And how much better it would be if we knew our history and could learn from past experience. There's a saying that says experience is the best teacher, but there's a counterpart to that says experience is the teacher of fools.
Right.
And so if we could be wise enough, it's great we learn from our own experience, but how much wiser would we be if we knew the experiences of our predecessors?
Yeah.
And learned from that without having to make the same mistakes ourselves.
Yeah, I was going to say that ties into that other quote that says those who fail to learn from history are destined to repeat it.
Exactly.
And so I feel sometimes when I look at the way our country is going, not just politically, but just in every area, I feel like there's a few lessons from the past that we hadn't learned. And I feel that's kind of what leads to our topic today.
Yes, indeed.
Because we're going to talk not just about the high cost of freedom when it comes to establishing a nation, but the high cost of freedom when it comes to managing our lives in general. Because if we just think that, well, I'm just going to declare that I'm going to do something different. Okay, great. What's that look like? So our nation 250 years ago, we celebrate this month, declared our independence from England. We had a group of representatives who sat in an office in Philadelphia and sat down and signed a document that they put in an envelope and shipped across the sea to tell the king that we wanted to be free. We did not want their governance anymore. Mm-hmm. If that's all it took to declare our freedom,
that was easy, wasn't it?
That was easy. You mean literally all I've got to do is write a letter and all of a sudden I'm an independent country. That's not what it was like, was it?
Not in the least, was it? It required a lot of bloodshed, a lot of diplomacy, and a lot of cobbling together 13 potentially independent nations into one united States of America.
Right.
And that, as you say, so often gets taken for granted that the founding fathers were able to achieve all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's important for us to realize is that if we want something different, there has to be a weighing of the cost. What are we giving up in order to receive this new thing? What are we going to do differently? And what does that actually look like? So when it comes to our nation, okay, so we want to be free from England. Do we have anything beyond that document that says, here's the list of the problems we have with you, so we don't want you anymore, but we have to have, what are we going to do next? Because that, as soon as we sent that letter, the king's response was to send soldiers.
Right.
And he started enforcing his rules even more. And if we didn't have a plan in place for how we were going to meet that resistance, we would have very easily fallen back into that same slavery, that same tyrannical control. The servitude.
Exactly.
And we would have been faced with an even greater problem of treason on top of it. So like we had to be able to stand our ground, make decisions that actually cost something.
Yes.
Knowing that cost could be the lives of a lot of people.
And it was.
And so what happened next was there was a multi-year battle that ensued, and to the point that we had to push back the government of England to the point that they finally stepped back due to the weight of the cost of lives. They said, we're not doing this anymore, and they left. And then from that point, we had to start from scratch. What does America look like? What does freedom look like? What do we want to enshrine in our laws that protect us from the same things that we were fighting against? There's a lot of history that happened there that I think a lot of times we gloss over by saying 1776, July 4th, 1776, we wrote a letter. So I think when we look at that financially, I might say, I want to be financially free. Okay, great. What does that look like? Does that look like I want to retire early? Does that look like I just want no debt? I want to make sure that my bank account is a positive number? Mm-hmm. Does it look like I want to be able to put gas in my car and stare off at the horizon, not have to worry about whether it's $3 a gallon or $5 a gallon? What does financial freedom look like? It looks different for a lot of different people. But if we don't have a clear view, then we're just going to start chasing something that may never fully materialize.
That's right. Yeah. And now I know what you're doing when I see you at the gas station filling up your car and you're staring off into the horizon. You're just not caring about that gas price.
I'm either daydreaming or I just don't want to watch my child's college education fund go into my gas tank.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and your point is spot on, Aaron. So many of us don't realize the discipline and the requirements to have that financial freedom to even define it for ourselves. And I think as we were talking about earlier, really the commonality of most people's definitions is just more choice. Having more choices on the table is really what it's all about. That really defines your level of wealth and your quality of life. And,
right.
I think back famously to Sam Walton. I'm an Arkansas boy, so I have this affinity with Sam Walton and Walmart. Established Walmart in this multi-billion-dollar retail empire, and very famously drove a 1979 Ford F-150 pickup truck, beat-up pickup truck, till the day he died. And so on the surface of it, you might be tempted to say, well, Sam Walton drove a pickup truck. I don't drive a pickup truck myself, but plenty of people I know do.
Right.
And a pickup truck is certainly an option for me if that's what I wanted to drive. And so on the surface of it, I could say, well, Sam Walton drove a pickup. I can drive a pickup. Therefore, Sam Walton and I are economic equals. But that would be a pretty ludicrous statement to make, because the point of it is that Sam Walton could drive anything he wanted. There's not a car built on planet Earth that he could not have afforded if he had chosen to do so. So his choices were almost unlimited in that regard, but he chose to drive an old Ford pickup. I may or may not drive a Ford pickup, but I certainly do not have those choices. And so to me, when we talk about the ways that a lack of a financial plan or how that hinders us, or we've even used the term financial bondage. That may seem overly dramatic, but the principle's the same. Whereas if I am mired by debt, if I don't have access to that wealth, I am simply not going to have the same choices that you may have if you have that plan.
Right.
And if you have those well-defined goals, and if you are using debt responsibly, whereas perhaps I have not, you're going to have a lot more choices available to you. And I think that's what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. Speaking in the mind of, Sam Walton being someone who he had extreme wealth, but he had this decision to drive and live frugally. That's something. There's a guy named Thomas Stanley who he died a few years back, but he wrote several books on The Millionaire Mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of his books called The Millionaire Next Door, he wrote about the idea of being income statement wealthy versus being balance sheet wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And income statement wealthy is the person who has a high value job. They might have a lot of zeros in their paycheck.
Right.
But that person who is income statement wealthy may also have high levels of debt. They may live up to the threshold of their income as opposed to living a lower lifestyle like Sam Walton did.
Right.
Sam Walton, the reason he was able to have as large of a lifestyle or a large of the net worth that he did is because of some of those decisions that he made. So going back to American freedom, we live in a country that has the open possibility of doing pretty much whatever you want. We live in a capitalist society where if you want to start a business, you can. There may be some taxes and some regulations in order to get certain types of businesses off the ground. But man, if you're willing to do the work, you can do whatever you want. But at the same time, with that freedom comes a large responsibility. Not to necessarily quote a movie here, but it feels like that line out of Spider-Man where it's like, with great power comes responsibility. I have been gifted this great nation with these great freedoms that people spent their blood to bring to me. Yep. Now I can do with it what I want. And if the choices I make put me in a place of financial control where I'm limited in my choices, it's not because of the environment that I'm here. It's because of the consequences of some of the choices I made. And that I feel is something when we look at our finances, we see the same thing as like, I may have put myself in a financial position because I made some decisions with my finances that weren't necessarily wise. Mm-hmm. And when we look at the statistics, we see that that's not limited to just a few people. According to Bankrate.com, nearly 1 in 4 Americans have no savings at all. And 46% of Americans, if they couldn't cover 3 months of living expenses if they lost their job or if something happened.
Yeah.
And it gets even worse when you look at those who do have savings. Only 40% of them could not cover an emergency over $1,000, which, I mean, shoot, that's tires on your car.
It doesn't take much, does it?
It doesn't take much to get you to the point to $1,000 expense. And that turns into a financial crisis for people. Yes. And so we've went from this goal of achieving freedom and achieving this American dream to be trapped in this American nightmare. And so how did we get here? From your thoughts, how do you think we got here as a nation?
That is such a fantastic question. And Aaron, I think as I think through this, my first thought is that this is such a broad and complex topic, and there's been books and so many lectures and dissertations and people who are just very highly intelligent, people much smarter than I am, that have attempted to answer questions just like this. And so I guess I would preface my answer by saying, I have a couple of things in my mind that I think about when that question is asked. How did we get here? While at the same time acknowledging that there's probably components that maybe other listeners of your podcast may say, well, here's what I think, and there's room for that discussion. And I think absolutely. It's a very important discussion. But I think one of the things that comes to mind when we ask, well, how did we get from the founding of America to where we are today? I think about the types of people those early Americans were, those founding fathers. And while they may not have been specifically devoutly religious people, many of them, they were still heavily influenced by this Puritan theology that said that your work, your personal labor is your personal offering to God. And so the idea that someone would not work and use that labor willingly was tantamount to sacrilege. And the famous rule at Jamestown, when Captain John Smith famously said, he who will not work shall not eat.
Yeah.
And that was the attitude. This was actually pre-founding of America in the colonial era, but still you contrast that to the attitude we have so often today, when even when we encounter people who willingly choose, hey, I could work, I could get a job, but I'm choosing not to do that.
Yeah.
And we look down on that perhaps, but we don't, we're not harsh to the point where we say, well, you're just going to have to starve because we're not going to help you.
Right.
That's very different. And so this quasi-religious influence continued long past America's founding in the form of the Protestant work ethic, which emphasized things like hard work and discipline and frugality, and these things were signs of virtue or high character. And so contrariwise, if you did not have these things, well, you were often thought to be somehow morally deficient. And so when you imagine a society where this is the dominant attitude towards work, productivity, towards good citizenship, and it's pretty easy to see how this type of society can create an atmosphere of tremendous productivity, especially once our nation won its independence.
Right.
And its right to govern ourselves. And so if you bring that whole general philosophy into the narrower focus of personal finance or even national fiscal policy, and if you buy into this concept of the Protestant work ethic, and that will be your best path to prosperity, individually or society at large, well, you're probably going to have certain attitudes towards debt.
Right.
Right? And towards your personal finances. And you're going to be far more careful about going into debt because you have this attitude that, well, my word is my bond. And,
right.
And if I don't pay off that debt, well, I'm going to have assets repossessed, obviously.
Yeah.
I might lose access, probably will lose access to future credit opportunities.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be severely diminished in terms of my standing in society and community.
Yeah.
And again, we can contrast that attitude very different to the attitude most people have towards debt today. And a few years back, we saw a lot of news headlines about the idea of forgiving student debt forgiveness. And I don't know how you feel or how law listeners feel about that, but I think we would agree that the attitude with which many Americans received that idea, it's like, oh, that's a great idea, I want my student debt wiped out.
Right.
Is probably very different than if you went back to the 1700s and said, hey, would you like me to, the government's going to forgive your debt for free. They might have a very different attitude towards that, and maybe even a little bit of feeling of, what's
the catch?
Yeah, or I'm offended. How dare you ask me to break my bond or break my word, and you want me to go back and ruin my reputation. And so obviously there's been some big changes there.
Yeah. Not to jump ahead in time to the Depression, but there's a movie. It's one of my favorite movies regarding this concept of personal responsibility. Have you seen the movie Cinderella Man?
Many years ago, but I don't remember a whole lot about it.
Okay, well, it's a story of a boxer. I think his name was James Braddock. In this movie, he is a boxer during the Depression, and he is trying to take care of his family. Finances are getting tight. He had broken his hand in boxing, so he wasn't able to box for a while, and had messed up a lot of things. They were on the verge of losing their kids, having to send them off to live with family because they couldn't afford to take care of him anymore. And he refused to go take money from the welfare office.
Yeah.
Until one point, whenever he was like, I'm about to lose everything, he finally went down and took some money out from the welfare office. But then later, whenever his hand healed up and he was able to start boxing again, there's a scene in the movie that I think really captures the heart of what you just explained. Is he went back to the welfare office with the prize money that he'd won from his fight. He had a list of every dollar he'd received from the welfare office. He sat down the receipt of all of the money and he laid down the money on top of it, pushed it over to the lady, and paid back everything that he received from welfare because he didn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is what that type of program initially was set aside for. It was to help people in a time of need. It wasn't set up to become a way of life. And just like with jumping ahead to, why do we have credit cards? Why do we have loan programs? We work for a bank. Lending is a very big part of how banks operate.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, as a community bank, our goal is not to set people in a position to where we control their lives.
That's right.
Our goal as a community bank is to be a tool and a resource to help you do something great with your life. If you need finances in order to start a business, in order to grow a business, in order to do different things, that's what banks are there for.
That's right.
But the goal is for you to get to a point financially where your business is making enough money to not just pay back the loan, but to start making a profit. To where you become self-sufficient. That is what the true American dream, in my opinion, was built for.
That's
and so
true.
Yeah. But I think what happened along the way and how we got to these statistics that I quoted a little bit ago is that people got so caught up in the idea of all I have to make is the minimum payment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I budget my life on minimum payments.
Right.
And instead of budgeting my life around debt freedom, I had to take out a $2,000 loan for this reason. I need to pay back $2,000 plus interest, but I need to do it as fast as possible. Instead of living that way, we say, okay, that $2,000 loan only has a minimum payment of $50. Okay, I'm just going to live on as I only owe $50.
Right.
And then I get another bill where I owe another $50. I get another bill where I owe another $100. And by the time we look up 2 years later, we're minimum paymenting our entire paycheck away to the point to where we can't make any progress. And I think that's how we ended up in this position as Americans, where we took the tool that was given to help us. We took the shovel that was given to help us and we buried ourselves with it.
That is such an appropriate analogy, Aaron. And I often read about how we just don't have, like we were saying, the levels of financial literacy that we need, for the common everyday American.
Yeah.
And the level of awareness of these core economic truths. And, a lot of people, they hear the word economics and they want to stick their head in the ground. Oh my goodness, that is so boring and so complicated. That's nothing but charts and graphs. And that's a lot of high finance people talking to me. I don't want to know about economics.
Yeah.
And because they have that attitude, they're missing some of the very basic, very simple economic truths that would help them. Of course, the other side of that is, unfortunately, there is a lot of people out there in the world, advertisers, retailers, politicians, who get a great advantage to misrepresenting economic truths and convincing you, number one, that you can afford something that I'm selling to you. I'm going to find a way for you, and you can do what you just said. You can get a $2,000 loan and you can buy my product and you can pay me back $50 a month. It's super easy. Yeah. No big deal.
Right.
And then you get yourself into that trap. And then, by the same virtue, a lot of politicians out there are going to tell you, hey, the negative consequences that you're dealing with in your finances are not your fault.
Right.
They're not because you weren't aware of certain economic principles, like you were responsible use of debt, savings, financial planning. No. The financial problems you're facing are someone else's fault. Usually the person on the other side, other political party.
Right.
They're someone else's fault. And so if you will elect me, I will find justice for you and I'll get you what you deserve, and I will get you fill in the blank.
Yeah.
By the way, this word deserve, that is something that really sticks with me.
Yeah.
It is pretty amazing. I would challenge your listeners, take a few weeks and just kind of pay close attention to the advertising that you come in contact with, whether it's in print, whether it's something on YouTube or streaming, and perk up your ears whenever you hear this word deserve. It is truly amazing how often I get told from an advertiser that I deserve something.
Yeah.
And you think about that, they don't know anything about me.
Right.
What do they know about what I deserve or don't deserve? But they are very aware that they are speaking to Americans who have grown up in an atmosphere where they've rarely been told that they don't deserve something. So yes, it's very easy for me, if I don't examine that, if I don't stop and look at that, an advertiser is going to say, you deserve a day at the spa. And I'm sitting in my lazy boy recliner thinking, I've been sitting here for a while. My back's a little stiff. Yeah, absolutely. I deserve a day in the spa. I deserve a massage.
Yeah.
So when we're no longer thinking critically about our financial position and making those financial plans, as you talked about earlier, unfortunately, there's a lot of people in this world that will benefit and are greatly interested in me being in that position of what we're referring to as financial bondage.
Right.
So it really takes that personal responsibility that I have to take responsibility for my own plan and be disciplined and execute that plan to avoid those traps.
Right. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Greg, and this is a 60-second 411. Let's talk about credit. What is it, and how do we manage it? The term credit typically refers to a relationship with a financial institution where you have borrowed money either in the form of a loan or credit card. Borrowing money may allow you to make a large purchase that can be paid back in smaller amounts over time. Each payment includes a portion that goes toward the amount borrowed, called principal, and a portion that covers the cost of borrowing the money, called interest. When payments are made regularly, you will begin to develop a credit history, which is translated into a score by credit bureaus. This score helps other lenders determine your ability to repay loans and use borrowed money wisely. Keep in mind that borrowed money must be paid back in full. Consider using a budget to plan your spending accordingly so you can make your payments on time. We hope you've enjoyed this quick tutorial. If you have any questions or would like to speak with a lending officer, visit www.texasbankandtrust.com. Until next time, this has been your 60-second 411.
Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender. All TBT lending products subject to credit approval.
All right, we're back once again with Chris Bearden, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer with Texas Bank and Trust. Chris, we were talking right before we went to break about financial bondage and what got us into this trap. The more I think about it, it's not really a matter of work ethic. It's not really a matter of people not having the desire or the willpower to work more to get out of debt. It's overwhelming sometimes when we think of all of the knowledge that we have to attain in order to properly manage our personal finances.
Yes.
Like, not everybody has the time, the energy, or the effort to learn everything. What's your credit score? Your student loans? What types of insurance do I need? What does retirement planning look like? How is retirement planning different than regular investing? How is investing different from saving for short-term expenses or short-term purchases? Mm-hmm. Taxes, oh my goodness, changes every other year. And then mortgages. And if I want to own a home, all of the costs and everything that goes into doing that and the maintenance and all of the upkeep. It's like we expect people who are trying to live their lives to understand all of these things. and it takes like you almost have to have a specialized degree in all of that just to handle your personal finances. And we're not taught that in school.
No, we should be. There should be some basic consumer math and consumer finance and things like simple budgeting and simple tax planning. I had the benefit when I was in junior high school. Not many high schoolers get this, but I at least had the benefit that I had consumer math education, and so they would do things like just very simple things. Teach me how to build a simple budget.
Yeah.
Teach me how to reconcile a sample checkbook. Teach me how to fill out a Form 1040 EZ. Nothing too complicated, but just being able to fill out a one-pager tax form. And it really was amazing how much of the anxiety that took out of my life later on when I had to do those things for real.
Yeah.
But there's so much out there, as you were talking about, but at the same time, I think most Americans are capable of learning more than they give themselves credit for. Like you said, it's not a lack of intelligence. It's maybe an unawareness of just how beneficial it will be to their life to get this stuff figured out and have a plan.
Yeah. That kind of leads into this different types of cultures that we've seen start to arise in America that starts to show us different mindsets of people. Mm-hmm. One of those cultures is the debt culture. The idea that, as we talked about the rise of credit cards and lending, these programs where now it's a buy now, pay later mentality, right, or the using other people's money mentality. I can't count how many times I've heard people say, it's like, you just buy it using other people's money and you just pay it back later. I'm like, why do I need to live my life on other people's money?
Right. Yeah.
We build this entire world around financing almost everything. And while working for a bank, we offer the funds to do that. We also need to help people learn responsibility. That, yes, the purpose of this podcast is for us to start thinking in a way that recognizes there's more to life than just paying debt. And it's not the problem. The challenge that we run into in our society isn't the fact that opportunities for debt exist. The challenge isn't the fact that banks offer loans. The problem and the challenge comes is when we allow the debt to control our lives and therefore start making decisions for us. Absolutely. As opposed to us living and being in control of where our money goes.
That's right. The danger to my waistline is not that cheeseburgers and pizza exist. It's,
right.
It's the fact that I sometimes can't stop eating
them. And I love them.
Yes, and they're so good and they're so easy.
Yeah.
And dieting is hard. And in the same vein, moderation of using credit and financial planning is difficult.
Yeah.
And so we only do it because we believe firmly that it's ultimately a better long-term outcome. Absolutely. And what you were saying about, the philosophy of using other people's money and buy now, pay later is I think an indication of that discussion we were having on personal responsibility and how that has definitely declined. We talked about, how did we get here from the founding of America to where we are today? And that decline, that deterioration of the sense of personal responsibility is definitely part of that. Think about all the changes that came post World War II and especially the 60s, where we're having so much social change. And so many of those changes were good. This was the era of the civil rights movement and, vast changes in attitudes towards women's roles in the workplace and in society. But along with that, we got a lot of educational philosophies in the school system that were very progressive at this time, and some of them, they weren't. I don't want to paint them with a broad brushstroke and say they were all bad, but one of the unfortunate ones is that idea of, our children are perfect as they are, and they're so honest, and it's only society and the people they grow up with that make them misbehave.
Right.
And we all see the validity of that policy. I know when my kids were young, when they would play ball with they would get the ball and they'd throw it back, and I'd have to stop them and say, no, don't throw it back. Be a little selfish here. Or when they took the last cookie in the cookie jar, I said, did you eat the last cookie? And they'd say, oh, yeah, I did. And I'd say, no, wait, you don't tell the truth the first time. Tell a little while, so I definitely had to tell my children to misbehave. Right.
Right.
And I'm obviously being sarcastic because I think,
oh,
it gets
you
a little
didn't
ridiculous.
do that. I was going to say, man, I was like, you had a very strange upbringing.
I had a very strange parenting style, didn't I?
Yeah, I was like, man, it's like I usually have to tell my daughter the opposite.
But that idea that children are perfect and they're honest, and it's only their upbringing that causes them to misbehave, and so when you are raised like that, and so we're now in the second and third generation of Americans that were kind of raised under those types of educational philosophies, and
right.
And we've seen the consequences and the logical extensions of that attitude. We lament the rise of participation trophies. Well,
yeah.
If my child's not responsible for their misbehavior, if their bad behavior is someone else's fault, then why should they be penalized because they're not the best ball player on the field? Or we see that in grade inflation in schools, where we give out more A's and B's than we used to and far fewer failing grades.
Yeah.
Because again, if my child's not responsible for their own behavior, why should they be penalized with a bad grade regardless of their own effort and their own work that they've put into that grade? And
absolutely.
So, this is just a development of that idea of I'm not personally responsible, and so to expect Americans to become adults and naturally be inclinated towards responsible financial management and taking ownership of that is a very difficult thing for them to be expected to do, I think.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes into the next culture shift that we've seen is not just the first one of recognizing that we live in a culture that's fixated on debt, but also a culture that takes increases in money, increases in income, and responds with an increase in lifestyle. Mm-hmm. It's like, great, I got more money, that means I can afford a bigger house. Or yes. I got more money, that means I can afford a larger car payment. Yes. As opposed to paying things off, as opposed to building wealth, as opposed to saying I've received a larger income, I could put more towards retirement or put more towards savings. We end up living a life that can't see past today's paycheck. And that it kind of merges with the third one I was going to talk about, the consumer versus ownership mindset, where we have the people who, rather than building assets, they just buy bigger things.
Yes.
And we see that a lot, especially, we live here in Texas. The oil field is one of those roller coasters of an industry.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And when times are good, there's a lot of new F-150s rolling around.
Yep.
When times are good, you see bass boats and side-by-sides in every driveway.
Yep.
But then when times start to get a little bit leaner, those same F-150s and side-by-sides have for sale signs on them going for half the price that they just bought them for. It's something that we see where people, rather than taking those good times and putting money aside, kind of goes all the way back to that fairy tale we learned when we were a kid about the ants and the grasshopper.
Yes.
We play when times are good and not think about the fact that we need to save for when winter comes.
And it's a tough decision to make, because when I have extra money that I didn't have before, it's perfectly natural to want to spend it on that nicer truck or that bass boat, because that's something visually I can look at, and my neighbors can look at, and I can see that as proof that I'm doing better. I'm financially successful because this bass boat in my driveway proves I'm financially. Whereas if I took that same money and did like you're talking about, put it in my investment account and let it grow, I'm not looking at that as much. And certainly I don't go around showing my financial statement to my neighbors, so no one sees me being successful.
You mean to tell me you don't have your net worth tattooed on your arm? Oh man, got to update that every 6 months or something.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just cross it out.
Yeah.
Or maybe just have the chart, but then I wouldn't want to show it to anyone when it starts heading down.
Yeah.
Right? But you're absolutely right. There's a pretty overwhelming temptation that when I have those extra funds, let's buy something that is fun, that's exciting, and that tells the world how successful I am.
Yeah. Absolutely. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Karen Partee with the TBT Financial Minute. From job loss to medical expenses, life is full of the unexpected. Be prepared with an emergency cash fund. Save up enough money to cover 3 to 6 months of household expenses and put it in an accessible savings or money market account. Should a crisis occur, you'll be prepared. Learn more at texasbankandtrust.com. TBT Financial Minute is brought to you by Texas Bank and Trust.
All right, welcome back. We're once again here with Chris Bearden, Chief Financial Officer for Texas Bank and Trust, and we are continuing our conversation on the high cost of freedom, what America celebrating 250 years teaches us about our financial freedom as well. And so in the past couple segments, we've talked about the condition and how we got here. We've talked about the overwhelming weight of all of these things that people face when it comes to making a decision for financial wellness. Like when we think about preparing for our financial future, do we begin with what's my credit score? Do we begin with student loans, paying them off? Do I need them? Do we begin with having the right type of insurance? Like there's all of these different realms of topics that can be overwhelming if you look at it from such a high level. But financial literacy begins actually on a smaller level. It begins with small steps in the right direction.
Yes.
And so that's what we're going to talk about in this third segment, because we don't want to just present this doom and gloom world of, hey, America broke itself because we decided to take the freedom we've been given and to completely take it for granted and throw ourselves back into a world of financial hurt. So this time, we're actually going to talk about some ways that we can improve our lives financially. We're going to talk about a few foundational principles that will move us in the right direction. The first one that I have written down, Chris, is the idea of making a budget and knowing where our money is going.
Absolutely. I think that is such a critical first step. As many people have said before, you can't know something unless you're monitoring it and measuring it. And so the first step is you really have to have a firm grasp of the dollars coming into your bank account and then where those dollars are going.
Yeah.
And that's a tough first step because so many of us are afraid of the answers because it could be something ugly. It's a scary thing to do. Going back to the diet analogy we were talking about later, it is sometimes very tough to step on that scale and see the number it spits out at you. It's just easier not to step on the scale at all.
Right.
And in the same way in finance, it's so much easier not to look at your bank account and see where all that money's going. But the first step is you got to grit your teeth and see where that money's going and figure out where you could improve and lay the ground rules for that budget.
It makes me think of that, going to the dieting mindset. It makes me think of all of those before and after pictures you see on the infomercials, the person who actually did the hard work and went through the exercise routine for the 90 days or whatever the program was. The first picture of them with their shirt off, they look sad and depressed and they hate life. But then 90 days later, they have this big grin on their face.
Yes.
And you could see muscles defined. They may not necessarily be where they want to be, but looking back 90 days later, they're a lot different
they feel
from
so
where
much
they began.
better.
Yeah.
And if you asked that person, was it worth it? Was it worth it to step on the scale and start that journey? You can imagine that they would very enthusiastically say it was absolutely worth every hard decision, every tough choice I had to make. And
they didn't feel that way on day one, though.
they did not feel that
Day
on
one, someone had to convince them,
yes,
you need to take off your shirt. Someone says, I need to take a picture of you, and I know you hate it.
Yes.
But you're going to look back on this picture, and it's going to be all the difference.
And they had to make that decision not just on day one. They had to make it again on day 2 and make it again on day 3, etc.
Yeah.
And it's the same way when you are embarking on this journey to improve your financial planning and improve your financial position. It's not just something you're going to listen to this podcast and say, okay, I'll do it tomorrow.
Right.
You do it tomorrow and then
the next day
never look at it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be a daily decision that this is something important and it's going to be a lifelong change, and I'm committed to improving my financial position and building that wealth and eliminating debt, or at least using debt more responsibly.
Yeah. It's one of those things, a lot of people, budgeting has become such a toxic word that it feels like it's, a 4-letter word, even though it's more than 4 letters. It's one of those things that people, they hate the idea of a budget because the reputation that budgets have is budgets, they control my life, and budgets take away my ability to do the fun things.
That's right.
And, thinking back to our idea of America, a lot of people, if you have a country without borders, do you have a country? Mm-hmm. If you have a financial plan without guidelines, do you have a financial plan? Right. If you're not looking at your finances and keeping track of it, do you actually have a financial plan at all?
Right.
It's the same thing with, with the way we eat. If we're not creating a realistic image of where we are, how do we know when we're making progress?
Right. And there is such an element of defeatism as well that often prevents people from taking that first step. And I know a lot of people that, their attitude is, why should I budget? I mean, you're giving me this advice to start a budget as if I'm someday going to be the next, millionaire, and then I'll own, I'll have this vast amount of wealth and I'll own a nice house and everything. And that's just not in the cards for me. That'll never happen to me. So why should I bother? And so many of us miss out because we start out with an attitude of defeatism, but maybe that's not the goal right now. Maybe the goal is just eliminate the debt to the extent that you can, or use it more wisely, and just be more aware of where you're spending your money on, and what better choices perhaps you could make, and don't make it about, the end result of this financial journey is to live in the right neighborhood and live in the gated communities and have this really nice house.
Right.
That can be planned later. Just starting off, let's find those achievable goals so we're not defeated by our own mindset from day one.
Right. I mean, what if instead of setting your goal as, I need to be the next CEO of some major corporation, or I need to have $1 million in net worth. What if my goal is, at the end of the month, I want to have put X amount of dollars into savings?
Exactly.
And what if at the end of 6 months, I know that next month, if something were to happen, my electric bill is covered.
That's right.
Or my rent is covered. I know that I've started to build myself into a plan to where a year from now, I can look at my savings account and say, if something happens to my finances, if I somehow blow all 4 tires or the air conditioner goes out in my house, I know that I have money set aside to where I don't need to borrow money to fix a small situation.
That's right.
Those little measurable goals can give us great confidence that eventually 3, 4, 5 years from now, if you're making small steps that way,
That's right.
you will be at a point where it's like, you know what? If something happened and I needed to face a medical emergency or something like that, my entire insurance deductible is sitting in a savings account.
That's right. And so it's not even as much about look at the new things I can buy because
Right.
I've done this, but look at the peace of mind I have, and look at the lower anxiety levels I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And when
Yeah.
I'm hanging out with my friends and I see how stressed out they are because they're worried about where they're going to make that next payment from, or how they're going to do this or how they're going to do that, and you can take comfort that I don't deal with that.
Yeah.
They're dealing with that, and I'll do everything I can to support them, but I don't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And it's because of these choices that I made.
Right. And so this budget that we've built leads to a place where we get to the second point, which is the importance of having an emergency fund, which we just kind of hit on a little bit, talking about the need for setting some money aside to where my goal, this first step, is to make sure that I know that I'm not going to be on the streets if
Right.
something financially happens.
If you lose your job or have to be in the hospital for
Right.
a while. Yeah, and that again is where it's very important to have those incremental goals. Of course, most financial advisors, the standard I think is about 3 months. You want to be able to pay all your bills and support your household for 3 months if you are suddenly without income. And of course, that's a pretty large savings account, really, when you add that all up. But if you just start with let's try and get that first month's worth, and then build that to 2 months and build that to 3 months, and just maybe you even have to do it in increments of, well, I can survive for 1 week,
Right.
I can survive for 2 weeks,
Right.
Even that is the steps that are going to get you there. Because again, if you just look at it from the front end and say, oh my goodness, 3 months worth of expenses, that is an astronomical amount of money. I'll never have that in savings. And so you've defeated yourself before you've even started.
Yeah. And that leads into our third one, because this third one is actually something that really started to flip the light switch in my mind, probably about 13, 14 years ago, when finances really started to make a lot of sense to me. Is the third one is having a strategy for managing debt properly.
Mm-hmm.
And not just managing debt, but getting to the point to where you can alleviate and remove debt. Because we just talked about that 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside can sound like an overwhelming number.
Yes.
Part of that reason is an overwhelming number is because your income that you're accounting for is minimum payments on a whole bunch of different debts.
Right.
Imagine if you didn't have a car payment. How much less would your monthly income or your monthly
that's a
bill
huge
be?
boost to your savings. Isn't
Yeah.
it?
Imagine if you didn't have 4 credit cards,
Mhm.
each charging $50 to $100 a month.
Yep.
Imagine if you didn't have student loans. All of these different things start adding up to where your monthly expenses might be 50% or more
That's right.
in debt payments. So imagine if those debt payments had been reduced, how much less you would actually need in that 3 to 6 month emergency fund to cover your bills. And then also think of, if those things you're paying on a monthly basis were freed up, how much of your income is going into savings rather than going to service debts.
That's right.
And so it's a shifting of mentality that goes from living a life that's focused on paying off debt or living with debt as part of my life to giving us back that freedom to make choices with our own finances.
Yeah, and when you look at your debt through that lens, we talked earlier about, it's so easy to look at your debt of, well, I just have to make $50 minimum payments. So that's my debt is just $50 a month. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at it in its totality, and that again is a very scary thing to contemplate.
That's the scale you got to stand on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage to do that. But
Right.
but you have to take that step to see that debt in its totality and really get a handle on it to figure out, well, I have to understand the debt, and then I can come up with a plan to attack it and whittle away at it. It's not going to be an overnight thing, obviously.
Yeah.
And there's steps that you can take or strategies you can explore. Debt consolidation or debt refinance sometimes helps. If we get to a period of lower mortgage rates, hopefully that will happen at some point. But if we get to a period of lower mortgage rates, and if you bought your house in the last several years and you've got a 6 or 7% mortgage, maybe someday we're back in the world of 3 to 4% mortgages.
Right.
And refinancing can be very helpful and strategically beneficial to your personal finance plan.
Right. And we look at all those things. It's kind of like that, going on a diet. We think that these things right now are such an annoyance and in our way of living our lives, but we don't realize the things that we're doing and not paying attention to are slowly killing us.
Right.
But once we actually step on that scale, we see the full weight of what we're dealing with, and then we strategically manage a plan to pay this stuff off, we start to see that light at the end of the tunnel, which leads us to our next foundational point, which is the idea of building assets and building wealth.
Yes.
Because once that debt load starts to come down, first off, that emergency fund doesn't need to be as large as you thought it needed to be. And now your income is freed up to where you can actually start planning. And this is where living that budget, we say, yes, a budget feels like a cage, but a budget's not a cage. A budget is guardrails.
That's right.
Because if we realize that this is guardrails and it's leading us in a path, once we start to reach the light at the end of that tunnel, all of a sudden retirement starts to come into focus.
Yeah, good things happen.
Yeah.
And it really is amazing when you get to that point and you look back and you say, look at where I was. And it's, like the before and after photo, look at where I was and look at where I am now.
Yeah.
And you really see the value of the discipline that you imposed upon yourself.
Right.
And have benefited from.
Yeah. And then just like the person who worked out sees the progress.
That's right.
What happens is I like that feeling of looking back and seeing the change. What can I do next?
That's right. And now there's no going back, and I'll never be that person I was.
Yeah.
On day one.
And that leads us to our fifth point, which is thinking beyond today. Because now I'm not just looking at my finances and saying, I've dug myself a hole so deep I can't get out. But now I see that I actually have a plan. I have a path. I have funds that separate me from the street, and I'm about to start building wealth that I can use for the future. So what do I want my life to look like? What does financial freedom actually look like for us? That's something I challenge the people in the audience. Ask yourself that question. What does financial freedom look like? Are you just wanting to get to the point to where you can make it paycheck to paycheck and not feel like you're drowning?
Right.
That might be the place where some of you are right now. But the goal is to get us beyond that to where now we're starting to save for the future. We have our finances in a position where we can think about where we go from here and what does retirement look like for you? What does it look like to pass wealth on to your children?
Right.
That sort of future-minded look changes our finances in such a way that, like that guy who's got all this debt or all this weight shed off from exercise, they now have a completely different outlook on life.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I think you're absolutely correct, Aaron. It's just a vastly different mindset And I think most Americans don't start on that path because it is so tough. It's so scary. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of discipline. And it's a decision you can't just make one day and say, okay, today I'm going to make the tough decision and not the easy decision. That's not going to work. You have to get up every single day and say, I'm going to once again make the tough decision, make the disciplined decision, and not the easy decision. And it's compounded by the fact that we live in a world where I am being bombarded every day with people who want me to spend my money, and the products and the experiences, and they look so good, and I really want that, fill in the blank, whatever it is. You're really going to want those things. Just like if I go on a diet, I'm really going to want a cheeseburger. I'm really going to want a pizza. And it's going to be so tempting to say, well, I'll just do it this once and then I'll get back on the plan.
Yeah.
So there's very few people that are actually able to make it work. And, you know, it would be so nice if you and I could sit here on this podcast and offer average Americans some quick and easy way to financial freedom, to building wealth. But it's simply not that easy. If it was so easy, we'd have a lot of very rich people around here.
Oh, absolutely.
But you know, the reason that people don't have the wealth they want, now there's many factors to that, and I certainly don't want to leave anyone with the message that you're not wealthy as you want to be because you don't work hard, because people work very, very hard.
Right, absolutely.
But it's not a problem with not working hard. It's just some of the choices we make, and having that financial literacy and having that discipline to make those tough choices. And you know, one of the reasons that I'm very proud to work for a bank, especially a community bank that believes in these things so strongly and does so much work, and you and I both know all the things that Texas Bank and Trust does to encourage and support financial literacy within the community, with things like junior achievement and the student boards that we do, and we do presentations through the Omni Club and these various lunch and learns.
Yeah.
You know, earlier this year we had that Insight series with Dr. Ray Perryman giving economic updates, and so in all these ways we support and encourage the financial literacy of the communities around us, which, as we said, is the first step. And then doing the step-by-step plans that I think you very appropriately laid out, Aaron, talking about ground rules, budget, having that cognizance of where your money's going from paycheck to paycheck, slowly building up that savings, getting a handle on debt, just knowing what's out there on your debt, being aware of the different strategies at your disposal to whittle away at that debt, and then get to that point where now I can start to build something for the future. And they're relatively simple steps, but again, that's the hard part, is none of them are easy, and they're only going to work as we can find the discipline to make ourselves do it.
Absolutely. Any last minute thoughts you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I think we've covered it very well. I think this is a very important topic. I think it's a great choice to talk about as we approach America's 250th birthday.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hope that we as Americans can do better in terms of these topics of financial literacy and being more aware, and take that personal responsibility, because, you know, unfortunately nowadays there's a lot of Americans that would rather make an easier choice of let's have the government take away the negative consequences of my financial situation.
Yeah.
But the financial literacy, the financial planning can be such a blessing,
Right.
to those that can find a way to make that work. And my hope is that will be a renewed commitment. I know it will be for us as a bank, but that will be a renewed commitment for many Americans, and keep this great American democracy going another 250 years, I hope.
Absolutely. Well, that is all the time that we have for this edition of Between the T's. I do want to thank Chris Bearden, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, for being on the program with me today. If the information you've heard in this program is useful for you, please feel free to like and share this episode. Help us grow our channel. If you live within one of Texas Bank and Trust's markets, we would love to be your bank. But if not, we hope this information is useful for you no matter where you live. Keep in mind that the discussions we had today are for informational purposes only, so please make sure you speak with a licensed or trained professional about your personal financial needs. Between the T's is a production of TBT Studios and Texas Bank and Trust, member FDIC, equal housing lender. Until next time, remember that knowledge is power when it is shared between the T's. Happy 4th of July, and thanks for joining us.